Running Aces Casino and Racetrack is the Twin Cities' premier choice for exciting entertainment, 24/7 gaming and dining, monthly comedy shows, and $1 blackjack with no commission or ante, making it the most player-friendly casino around. Trout Air Tavern at Running Aces offers Minnesota-inspired handcrafted dishes with locally sourced ingredients and the trout that made the area famous. Running Aces Casino and Racetrack, 25 minutes north of downtown. Visit runaces.com. Running Aces, your night out is waiting. TCL is a proud sponsor of the 1500 ESPN studios. TCL, America's fastest growing TV brand. Minnesota Vikings, the NFL, football, yeah, football. Welcome to Purple Podcast.
Hello, welcome to another episode of the Purple Podcast. Matthew Coller, along with former NFL quarterback Sage Rosenfels. Sage, how are you this morning?
I'm doing just fine. Another fun week of Sunday action with our 3 or 4 overtime games yesterday. It was quite the wild Sunday of football.
And you and I were lucky enough to watch Bills, Packers, and Bears and Bucks were the games that we got here. As I'm seeing the ticker go by, telling me about all the other great games in the league, we got the 2 worst.
Yeah, those are probably those were absolutely the 2 worst games to watch yesterday. Unless you're a Bears fan and you've been wondering about Mitchell Trubisky, then you're extremely happy. He sort of had his breakout game, and the Bears are. I'm guessing the Bears are in first place in the NFC North.
Yeah, actually, I haven't looked at the standings this morning, but that must be the case. So let's talk about some of the offense that happened yesterday because it's just madness. I saw a stat that Joe Montana's career quarterback rating is now the NFL average quarterback rating. I was watching the end of the Indianapolis and Houston game, and you see both quarterbacks going crazy, guys going for over 400 yards. We saw it on Thursday night with Jared Goff and Kirk Cousins' performance. What is going on with offense in the NFL? I mean, why all of a sudden has it just been turned up to 11 this year after it seemed to have kind of flattened out a little bit after everyone was talking about how, the NFL was all passing, and then this year it's just gone nuts.
Yeah, it really has, and I'm not sure, exactly. I don't think you can put your finger on exactly one thing, and I'd like to sort of see the statistics as the season goes on and we sort of get to the end of the year, then look back. I always sort of take everything with a grain of salt early in the year. Teams like to throw the ball early when the weather's good, in the, cold climate conditions like Green Bay or Chicago as the year goes on. Teams get more conservative, run the football. It's just hard to complete as many passes. I do think this, and tell me what your thoughts are. In the past with NFL wide receivers, everybody loved, sort of big, stronger guys like T.O., Jerry Rice.
Mm-hmm.
That was sort of your prototypical star receiver. I feel like in the last year, really recent years, but in particular this season, we're seeing a lot of guys who are smaller, who, you think would have been a great college player, but maybe wasn't an NFL fit. These guys like Brandon Cooks who with the Rams, these extremely fast receivers who it seemed like in the past were just sort of slot guys or kickoff and punt returners, but weren't looked at as, legitimate NFL, receivers because they were smaller.
Mm-hmm.
They couldn't get off the bump and they get jammed at the line. It seems like a lot of teams, and the Rams have sort of 3 of those guys. They're all really fast guys, Woods and Kupp and Brandon Cooks, just burners. And I think, it seems like a lot of teams have those types of guys now, not necessarily always going after the Julio Joneses of the world. A lot of teams have these super fast guys, and maybe that's part of the reason that there's, plus all the rules of protecting the quarterback, all the rules on defense where they can't basically touch anybody after 5 yards, and they throw these penalties all the time. I'm wondering if this sort of combination is creating all this offense.
Definitely with you on that. I mean, especially with wide receivers going over the middle, because even when I was growing up, if you went over the middle, they would talk about you on the broadcast all day long as being such a tough receiver and all that, and now everybody's allowed to go over the middle because safeties can't launch themselves. Steve Atwater and John Lynch would have just been kicked right out of the league, right? I mean, that's got to be one factor. I think that also, to your point, it's that a lot of the receivers have become technicians. I mean, I think that, you grow up in the game with so much more information, so much more coaching, that a lot of them get to the top level and they understand the game really well. They understand route running really well. And it's not just you're a pure athlete. The quality of the receivers goes into it. The quarterback's not really having to worry about getting decked goes into it. I mean, I like going back and watching the old games, and I could tell you Joe Montana got his ass kicked on a weekly basis, and that guy would just get up and get up and get up. Who's getting their ass kicked anymore for quarterbacks? It just doesn't happen.
Yeah, we saw a hit yesterday with Baker Mayfield. He just you could say the guy used his helmet, but it wasn't that hard for the Raiders. And boom, 15-yard penalty. They're going like, hey, he's a rookie. Like, he's got to get hit some. He's got to earn that respect. Right. I don't like to call it on Brady or Rodgers, but man, at least those guys have been around and earned it and been MVPs. This kid needs to take some hits, as the young guy. I do think you're correct on all that stuff over the middle. I mean, that used to be treacherous territory. And I think a lot of these guys are, not as concerned about, literally getting their head taken off like they were in the past. They're protected. So not that it doesn't happen, but it's less likely. So yeah, there's a combination here going on. Oh, the last thing you thought was a great point. I think quarterbacks now and receivers from an earlier age, and I do this stuff. I'm part of this group called the Quarterback Collective, and Sean McVay and Kyle Shanahan are sort of spearheading this group of NFL coaches and former guys like myself. Kirk Cousins and I talked about it a few weeks ago after the game that we're training these high school quarterbacks to be pro quarterbacks, understand coverages, taking all these snaps from center, the play action stuff that most high schools don't do. And at the same point, wide receivers are doing it. I don't know if you remember the name Chris Chambers.
Oh, of course.
But he was a teammate of mine with the Miami Dolphins, a Wisconsin Badger. He lives still down in Miami, and he runs this, I think it's called like the Chambers Academy or something. And he trains all these high school and college kids in the off season. And I see some of that stuff on my Instagram, and it's unbelievable. It's great route running and precision and all this fine detail that kids never got in the past. So I think there is this combination going here. People are more prepared. The throwing and the catching aspect of football is one of those things you can start at an early age. Mm-hmm. And I think that's just getting better and better, because of that as well.
And the other thing too, in my mind, is that when someone like Sean McVay or Kyle Shanahan comes along and they have offensive innovations, I think it's really easy now to have all the tape at your fingertips from several different angles, all the analytics. Pro Football Focus works with every single team, so there's data on all these things, what works, down and distances, and all sorts of different stuff, different coverages, where pressure comes from, on how many percentages. If you wanted that information back in the day, you had to have somebody in a room who was watching it or pay somebody to do it, and now it's just at your fingertips. I think all these things kind of play into it. And then maybe the other thing, Sage, is last year we saw a bunch of good quarterbacks get hurt. And this year we add Baker Mayfield to the mix, who looks like he could be a very, very good quarterback. We add more talent to the mix. And now if you go through, I mean, there's probably 25 teams that have at least competent, good quarterbacks that are out there. I mean, I don't think that there's ever been a time in the league where I could say there were more than a dozen. And now it seems like I'm watching Deshaun Watson go up against Andrew Luck, and you're just seeing all these really good matchups because there's just great quarterback talent now in the league.
Yeah, and guys that weren't always great quarterbacks in the past are having good years this year. I think I saw a stat. I think Andy Dalton might have the most touchdown passes of anybody over the course of like the last 16 or 20 games going back to last year. I mean, you would never think that, but there's guys putting up big numbers all over the place. And some guys, like Kirk Cousins, like Ben Roethlisberger, are putting up record numbers right now. And it's not a good thing because they're behind and they're trying to catch up and try to keep up with other offenses. And, that might be an issue with the Vikings right now is they're throwing the ball a lot, putting up a lot of stats, but of winning football, they're not playing winning football. They're not controlling the clock. They're not running the ball very well or very much. And I think that's hurting their defense as well.
Well, that's a good point because last year Case Keenum was not throwing for 400 yards a game, and major part because they were playing from ahead because their defense was so good. So let's talk about that a bit because you had a chance to look at some of the All-22 film, and give me your observation about the first half defense where it especially seemed like the Rams could do no wrong.
This episode presented by Minnesota's very own Ticket King. If you're looking for tickets to a game or concert, visit TicketKingOnline.com or the link on the 1500 ESPN Sports Calendar page. Seats to fit every budget at all venues and all stadiums with zero fees added at checkout. Visit TicketKingOnline.com or call 612-341-4141.
Yeah, what I saw early on is, for the most part, you'd say the Vikings played pretty good defense. You watch as a whole, about 90% of the plays, 9 out of 10, you're like, all right, it's a pretty good defense, pretty good coverage. Maybe they completed a ball, but it was for a shorter gain, or they ran the ball for 4 or 5 yards, but they did a decent job defensively. But then there'd be this, major breakdown. There was I believe like a 3rd and 4 early in the game. Xavier Rhodes gets a holding penalty that was, otherwise would have been a punt. Later on that drive, I think he gets another penalty. Otherwise, it would have been a punt. When you're going against a really good team, like the Rams, you basically have to play perfect. And as soon as you make a little mistake there, they really capitalize on it, and they did in that ball game. There's no reason for this Vikings defense, no matter who they're playing, to give up, 28 points in the first half. But, again, all those factors that you and I were just talking about is, offenses and passing games had an advantage. The Rams took, they took advantage of all those things. And so, there was the long play action play where Cooper Kupp, was about a 70-yarder.
Mm-hmm.
That was a huge play, early in the football game. Mackenzie Alexander's straight man-to-man coverage just lets him go, completely lets him go. I'm not sure if he thought it was a bootleg coming back at him and that the receiver was going to go in and come back out. He didn't. He went in and stayed in and sort of ran a wheel route from the other side and, makes, Anthony Barr look really bad because he's the one chasing him. Was not Anthony Barr's fault. So there was just, it seemed like a breakdown, defensively about once every, 6 to 10 plays. And, if you're going to be a really, really good defense, you sort of have to play perfect all the time. The matchups were, challenging already with this Rams offense. So you can't make mistakes. And Xavier got called for, 2 or 3 really simple holding penalties. And they were all legit holding penalties. He has hands all over him. He's tugging on him. Just not good plays by him, who's, really supposed to be the Vikings' best defensive player.
And I think that Brandon Cooks is a really tough matchup for him because he's small and he's fast. And I was kind of surprised that maybe they just didn't use him how they would if he wasn't like a shadow corner, or if they, maybe put him on Kupp, who's a little bigger, or Woods, who's a little bigger. I thought that was kind of a tough one for him, one of the tougher ones. Kind of remind me of when he went against Marvin Jones with the Lions, where It just didn't seem like that was the guy that he really should have been on.
You're right now that you say that, and I was sort of thinking about this during the game as they lined everybody up. You had McKenzie on Kupp. You had Woods being guarded by Waynes, and you had Xavier on Brandon Cooks. That when it was man to man, that's who they all sort of went. The Vikings aren't one of those teams that sort of play left and right corners and man. They truly have an individual matchup. And, despite Xavier's a good corner, but he's really good against other bigger, wide receivers, guys he can sort of body up. He's a big, strong guy. I mean, he almost has the body of a safety, which is why he's a good physical corner. But the guys that are super quick, if he doesn't get his hands on him, that is his weakness. He doesn't have that much speed to catch up with guys. Of course, almost nobody does in the NFL. Brandon Cooks is a special talent with his speed, but he just did not have enough juice, to keep up with Cooks. And that was a matchup that the Rams exploited. And
you mentioned Alexander. It seems like once a game, other teams are getting some big gain because something has gone wrong there. I mean, the Jimmy Graham at the end of the first half, getting a 28-yard gain to allow the Packers to score at the end of the first half. I mean, this sort of stuff has happened to him almost every single week. It seems to me, Sage, that they are really missing Terrence Newman. As old as the guy was, he was really good, but also really good at knowing the game, really good at communicating, and it didn't seem like he would make too many mistakes because he was one of the smartest players on the field, and that's kind of the name of the game if you're going to succeed on defense now.
Yeah, and what Zimmer's looking for is consistency, and I think that's one of the things that Newman was. He was consistent. He didn't always make the play, but he was consistently right there. He had so much knowledge of the game. He understood, offensive concepts and what offensive teams try to do versus whatever coverage that the Vikings would be in. So then, he could anticipate. He could break on balls. He could make the tackle, break up the ball. But it seems like we got a couple guys out there in that third spot, who are, just trying to make plays, Hughes and Alexander, and they're just not consistent with that. And that takes a lot of time, but, those guys have to step it up, with so many teams playing with 3 wide receivers now, and also tight ends that are extremely athletic and pass catchers. You have to have 3 corners that all can play, and you have to consistently play at a high level, throughout an entire football game. And it just seems like right now the Vikings just have an occasional slip up, an occasional bust, and ends up, and it has cost them basically each and every time they make a mistake.
Do you think at some point we're going to see almost every team playing dime out there for the most part, maybe aside from first downs, but maybe even first downs? I mean, it seems to me like the running game is only there to set up play action for a lot of teams with all the throwing that they're doing. And the Patriots do some of this where they've got 6 DBs out there at one time. I wonder if that's an adjustment that they make, is maybe getting a linebacker off the field sometimes.
Yeah, that might be a situation. I mean, the Vikings do a pretty good job at stopping the run. I can't say they're great. It does seem like there's a lot of 4 to 5, 6 yard runs out there. Gurley had some nice runs in this football game, but sometimes it's okay to be bled to death a little bit and just give up those 5 yard runs, because now the pass is so important. So that might be a situation to look at. The one issue is, the Vikings, there's been conversation with Ioka. Is it Iloka?
Iloka, yes.
Playing more, but he seems to be more of almost a linebacker type, and less of a guy who can really, really cover, like a true safety. So it's hard to have a safety type player covering wide receivers. Do we go more of that 3 safety look? Either way, the Vikings defense, which was a strength before, it was definitely a weakness in this last football game. And, that's a problem. Is, the Vikings offense doing a lot of really good things, putting up a lot of yards, putting up some points, but, said last year they were always playing from ahead, and this year, from fairly early on, they're playing from behind.
Yeah, and we saw Kirk Cousins respond pretty well in that game, putting up 31 points, fumbles at the end, and there's something that I wanted to ask you about with that, because after the game, we go in, we ask Kirk Cousins, okay, what's going on with the fumbles? What happened on that play? And his response was, "You tell me, man." And I've been thinking about this a lot, even going back to April, when they first get Kirk Cousins, and some of the things that were said in DC and how they might carry over. Because I acknowledge that if you're in a place that you don't love or doesn't love you, it might change when you leave and go somewhere else where you get $84 million and you're the franchise guy. But I thought that was kind of typical of how he has been in post-game press conferences, or in even just press conferences in general, where sometimes he will kind of take some mild shots at people and things like that. And I wondered if that rubbed people the wrong way, and what your experience was with handling a post-game press conference, and whether that reverberates in the locker room or not.
Lucky's 13 Pubs has you covered for the best game day experience this football season. Tons of TVs, legendary appetizers, amazing fresh half-pound burgers, handcrafted sandwiches, and a wide variety of other pub favorites. The drink menu is awesome, too. Huge selection of tap beer, handcrafted cocktails, and the best Bloody Marys in town. Seriously, these Bloodies are awesome. Try the Bacon Bloody, the Jalapeno Bloody, the Mother Mary, or just get a flight and try them all. Plus, Lucky's 13 celebrates Sunday Fun Day. Happy hour all day long on Sunday, every Sunday. Events and prize giveaways during games, too. Lucky's 13 has locations in Bloomington, Burnsville, Mendota, Plymouth, and Roseville. Having people over for the game? Call ahead to Lucky's and order some of those legendary apps, and they'll be ready to bring home when you get there. It's football time at Lucky's 13 Pubs. Find them online at luckys13pub.com. luckys13pub.com. It's the most wonderful time of the year, football time. And Lucky's 13 Pubs has you covered for the best game day experience. luckys13pub.com.
Yeah, well, I think that everything that the quarterback says is huge in the locker room of, gaining the respect, and, sort of dishing out praise to your teammates and accepting blame. So I didn't love how he answered that question. And listen, I'm a big Kirk Cousins fan. I think he's very, very, very much a team guy. Now, he's an absolute perfectionist, which I do like as a quarterback. I always remember when I would have certain games you'd go through, and even if I played really well, you look back and you go, okay, on this play, man, I could have done that. On this play, I could have done that. I remember missing this throw. I could have, audibled here. You sort of look at all your mistakes, and he has almost a photographic memory of how hard he is on himself. But, that question, I didn't love, that answer. Of course, when you just played the game, you don't know what happened a lot of times.
Mm-hmm.
You're listening. They're not, when you're out in the field, you're not watching all the replays. And even if after you come off the field and they show the replay in the stadium, a lot of times you're not looking at it. He obviously was upset that basically, lost in the game there at the end and sort of ended the game there. But, one tip that I was given in college, I did an internship in Des Moines, Iowa when I was at Iowa State. And I sort of interned for the CEO of this big company. And he said, when you're talking at press conferences or about your team, this is, going into my senior year at Iowa State, he goes, always use the word we at all times. Always use the word we. Never say they. Don't use I unless you're basically blaming yourself. Always use the word we. And that's something I always tried to do, throughout my college and NFL career after that is, we're in this thing together. And football is the ultimate team sport. And, my guess is that at that point there, Cousins was, one, he's frustrated, and two, he probably didn't know what was going on. We're sitting there going like, oh man, he could have stepped up in the pocket. He should have stepped up in the pocket. At the end of the day, he's just not a guy like Aaron Rodgers who just floats around that pocket like Muhammad Ali. It's just not the way he is. It's definitely something he needs to probably work on, during practice or whatever. There were times in that game he could have stepped in the pocket, and there was definitely times there was nothing there. I mean, it's hard to say, hey, step up in the pocket. That's where Sue and Errol Donald are trying to come after you to get push on the inside. It's hard to mentally think that step into those guys, but obviously on that play, he could have stepped up.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where, from my standpoint, I want to acknowledge how well he played, because there wasn't a whole lot more he could have done in that game, and he was under siege the whole time. I mean, I thought the offensive line tried as hard as they possibly could have, and Riley Reif actually was a warrior in that game. And that's, I guess, what I would have liked to have seen him say is, look, that play's going to make Riley look bad, but he was a warrior. He went out there and played with a foot injury, and he only gave up a couple pressures the whole night. It was really, the interior facing Donald and Sue that got them. But I guess what I would have thought was that Cousins would have given some credit to Reif for playing the way that he did, playing hurt. We weren't sure if he was even going to play. And instead he just kind of threw it back at the reporter. And that's never really going to sit well, even if you smile while you're doing it. Did you ever run into issues where you said something in a post game and then teammates came up to you and said something about it? Or did you see that? Or was it mostly just guys didn't really care what got said in post game press conferences?
No, I don't think so. And I think in this situation, and I'm sure some of the players probably saw what he said, but I don't think they made much of a big deal out of it. I mean, you're after the game, you're a bit chippy, you're upset, you lost. The Vikings have lost a couple in a row now. And it's not like he said, hey, my left tackle, got beat and that's what caused a fumble. I mean, he just said like, hey, you tell me, I don't know what happened, on that play. So, it wasn't the best answer, but it could have been a heck of a lot worse. And I said, as a quarterback and shoot as a head coach, every word that you say is going to be picked apart a lot of times by the media and by the fans. But to be honest with you, players aren't paying attention to that. There's so much going on. You're in the game plan. You're in all these little things. The other players aren't going to nitpick about what, those guys say unless it's, obviously a terrible thing. So I think the thing is that the Vikings they're counting on Cousins to do too much. I know it sounds crazy. Like, hey, he's supposed to be a franchise guy. We're paying him like a top, 10 quarterback shoot. They're probably paying him like a top 5 quarterback in the league, but also he shouldn't be asked the offensive line shouldn't be asked to block 45, 50 passes a game. The quarterback shouldn't be throwing 45, passes a game. The other guys got to do their job. The defense has to play better so they can run the football and just play sort of a regular football game. And right now, it's like they're trying to play in this fast break style. And that's not how they won 13 games last year. And they sure as heck ain't going to win 13 games this year, trying to outscore everybody, 45-42.
Now that's a great point, because I think we look at the two things as if they don't affect each other, but they definitely do. Offense and defense, and even the special teams part of it, depending on where your field position is. But offense and defense kind of go along together, and we don't usually look at it that way. And especially some of the numbers that they put up. You mentioned the other day about Drew Brees, some of the times where he had to put up 5,000 yards because his defense was letting go all sorts of, scores from the other teams. And last year, Breeze is fantastic, but he doesn't throw for 5,000 yards because his defense was better. Last thing for you, Sage. If you were playing with Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen for your whole career, what numbers would you have put up? Because I'm watching them the other night, and I've seen, both of them rise from guys that people didn't know to, some of the best wide receivers in the league. But when you watch them, does your jaw just drop?
Well, it just blows me away. Listen, I've never been a college scout or scout, pro scout, whatever. It's not something that I really, paid much attention to, but, how did these guys slip through the cracks? And, it's understandable with Thielen, going to a much smaller school. So what we talked about earlier with all the sort of private coaching and private training, my guess is that, he was just a really good high school athlete who really, really developed. Once he got to the NFL, it seems to be that sort of the situation. The Stephon Diggs, how he fell to the 5th round, just baffles me because he is so talented. He is one of those guys, sort of like a Jarvis Landry. He's great after the catch, but he also rises up, and plays much bigger than he is. I mean, he's a phenomenal talent. You throw wide receiver screens to him. You can throw, go routes and post routes to him. He's good on deep stuff. He's great with the underneath stuff. Again, he's tremendous after the catch. It does blow me away that these two guys, were sort of undrafted and lower drafted when, teams are constantly looking, in drafting receivers in the 1st round. It seems like every year there's about 3 to 6 receivers drafted in the 1st round, and half of them are good and half of them stink. And the Vikings obviously found these 2 gems, lower in the draft. And so, they're very, very lucky because if they didn't have them, that's our issue. We've been talking about with Treadwell, some concerns there. He had another drop in this football game. Did have some nice catches, but had another drop in the game. It was really nice to see Robinson come through with a couple touchdowns. Those are obviously a huge surprise.
I think he's a good player, Robinson. I mean, I went back and watched some of what he did in Washington with Cousins, and I'm actually surprised that San Francisco let him go. Maybe he just wasn't a scheme fit, but he told me that he was also very, very surprised. And their loss, I guess, is the Vikings' gain there. With those two, with Diggs and Thielen, I think one of the things is, Sage, that they push each other too. So they were already talented. And Diggs was a 5-star high school guy. So to your point, I mean, maybe it was the injuries or the size. I went back and read like the NFL.com scouting report, and a lot of people thought he could only be a slot guy, which is really funny now. But I mean, a 5-star recruit coming out of high school, so he clearly had the talent. But
and I think that's what we talked about when we started this podcast. Is there seems to be a more of a spot and for these guys who aren't 6'4" and 220 pounds. That used to be like the premier, the Andre Johnsons, Julio Jones. Those types of guys. Now Josh Gordon, obviously with the Patriots, everyone was looking for those guys. I think that teams are going, what? It's much easier to find these super explosive guys who are more around 6 foot, shoot even, 5'11", who are just burners and who can, do things after the ball's in their hands, jet sweeps and wide receiver screens and they're just playmakers and get the ball in their hands. And obviously Diggs he's a special player when that rock's in his hands and he can make guys miss and extremely explosive after the catch.
Yeah, for sure. He reminds me of Andre Reed. I grew up watching Andre Reed from Cookstown State, and another guy who just, didn't make it on the pure athleticism or size or anything, but being a technician and a competitor. Last thing for you, Sage. Toughest place you ever played? Because, Philly, not the easiest place to go into.
Yeah, that's true. The Vikings have a lot of memories going into Philly from last year. It is nice. They get basically a mini bye, so they have 10 days to prepare. Just having like 3 days or so to get your bodies healed up right after the long trip to Los Angeles. And Philly just comes off a really, really tough loss yesterday down in Nashville. That was a really, really good football game. And Philly came out with the L there. So Philly's a tough place to play. Definitely one of the tougher places to play. I played there a couple of different times. One, I played there with the Vet, the old school. Yeah. My first year in Washington, when the old Vet was still there, they said always leave on your helmet because you might get a battery. They used to throw batteries at some of the players at the old Vet. I'm not sure if they do that as much anymore. And I played when I was with the Giants at the end of my career. We went to Philadelphia. The field's usually sort of crappy. It gets beat up pretty quickly there. They do have great fans, super passionate, and they love the Regals, and obviously they're the defending Super Bowl champions. So the Vikings are going to have to play great, to win this football game. They sort of like this last game. They've got a multitude of wide receivers, not as fast, bigger guys, Alshon Jeffrey and Aguilar. They're a little bit bigger guys, lankier players. Maybe that's a better matchup for the Vikings than those speedsters that the Rams had.
All right. Well, we will connect again to preview that game, and also we will have our journeyman quarterback of the week, as always, on our next episode. So, Sage, great to talk with you again, and thank you all for listening to the Purple Podcast.
There's nothing more predictable in life than the unexpected. Lightning will always strike. Hail will fall on roofs. Fortunately, there's AAA. AAA has been helping members stay prepared for over 100 years. So when unusual storms, fallen debris, or sudden leaks happen, you'll be covered. Check, check, and check. Get an insurance checkup to make sure you have the home and auto coverage that's right for you. Visit AAA.com/checkup or stop by your local AAA store.
I'm Rita Foley with an AP News Minute. We're learning what an accuser has told the FBI about Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh.
Deborah Ramirez has said Kavanaugh exposed himself at a Yale dorm party. A source familiar with her questioning says she detailed her allegation yesterday and gave investigators names of people who can support it. That comes amid a partisan dispute over how much leeway the FBI has in conducting the investigation. Democrats say the White House is micromanaging the Bureau. President Trump says it has free rein.
AP correspondent Sagar Magani, an American cancer researcher and a Japanese researcher, have won the Nobel Prize in Medicine.
The 2018 Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine jointly to James P. Allison and Tasuku Honjo.
The number of dead in Indonesia's earthquake and tsunami is now up to 844, say authorities. I'm Rita Foley.